think your 60s are when you start slowing down financially, but in reality, this might be the most important decade of your entire retirement plan, and what you do now or what you fail to do is going to decide how free you really are in your 70s and beyond. So in today's video, I'm breaking down the 7 powerful moves that you can make right now to stop wasting your 60s so that you can retire on your own terms. You know, a lot of people, when they enter their 60s, are thinking, okay, I just need to coast into retirement, and they've either done enough or they think that it's too late to make any real changes. And that mindset is one of the biggest financial mistakes I think you can ever make. But the truth is that your 60s are the last decade where you really still have any power to shape your outcome. And, I can promise you, except for maybe the most dire situations, it's definitely not too late to start turning things around. And most people just simply don't optimize that power. And instead, they kind of waste it just sort of coasting for a few more years. So there was an interesting study a while back from the National Bureau of Economic Research. And, they found something staggering. And it was this, that delaying retirement by just 3 to 6 months has the same impact on retirement income as saving an additional 1% of your salary over 30 years. That's how powerful this stage of life is and how dangerous it is to just sleepwalk through it. So I think the first question we want to ask is, well, why do so many people get this decade wrong? And there's a few reasons, right? So the first one is because, a lot of conventional retirement advice, and that's things like, oh, just keep maxing out your 401k or work as long as you can just to be safe. This kind of stuff often leads people to maybe oversave in the wrong accounts. Maybe they start taking the wrong risks, or they might even miss their strategic window for course correction. And as a result, a lot of them end up working into their 70s, and it's not because they want to, it's because they have to. Another aspect is because you're at this critical late stage, financial mistakes that you make in your 60s are going to be magnified. So you've got less time to recover, you have more on the line, and if you're still carrying like non-mortgage debt or spending more than you earn or, ignoring how your portfolio is actually performing, those kind of missteps can quietly destroy your retirement timeline. And, this is not the decade for guesswork, right? This is the time to be precise. Something else that kind of throws people off track is that the 60s, people start to face new types of pressure, right? You've got rising healthcare costs, job burnout. You might have aging parents that you're taking care of. And, you may even be still providing help to your adult children. And so you could even add to that the temptation to maybe kind of splurge during your peak earning years. It's very human for you to do that. And so it's easy to kind of fall into the trap of financial drift. But as I said, the good news is it's not too late. And the strategic decisions you make in your 60s about spending and savings and taxes and investments and lifestyle, these are going to radically improve your timeline and increase your control. And so that's what this video is about, right? So we're going to go over the 7 strategies that are designed to help you avoid the most common traps and take advantage of your most powerful decade and retire on purpose, not by accident. Now that you understand why your 60s are a critical decade for retirement optimization, let's examine the first strategy that can transform this decade from wasted time into retirement acceleration, right? And that is strategy number 1, reduce your cognitive load, right? Think about it. You get into your 60s, your life just becomes more and more complex. Think about everything we just talked about. And now you're heading into retirement with 1,000 decisions that are still bouncing around in your head. And you're setting yourself up for stress, confusion, and costly mistakes. And so, one of the most powerful things that you can do in your 60s is just reduce your cognitive load and simplify your financial life and, hopefully clear the mental space you need to make smart and focused decisions. And so, I'm going to say it's not just about peace of mind, although that matters, but it's also a strategy. Too many people are going to waste their 60s reacting to noise and, they chase headlines, they bounce between maybe different financial advisors. They keep old accounts they haven't looked at in years, or they might even obsess over details that simply aren't going to move the needle. And in some ways, that even leads to decision paralysis, where you just don't do anything, and that's not good either. So I even see things like, I'll see people with a bunch of old accounts. It's like you leave one job and then you never rolled it over or did anything. You kept it invested in whatever it was invested in, and then you just moved on to your new job and you completely forgot about it, right? So you have no type of unified strategy for anything. And that's just one example. But then you've got like 10 old accounts just floating around out there, and it's even difficult for you to track these things. So simplification is going to go a long way here. So your 60s is the perfect time for you to simplify, right? Consolidate your old 401k accounts and IRAs. You want to automate your savings and bill payments. Also, just set up predictable income streams for your retirement, and use rules and not feelings to guide your investment decisions, because the more clarity you create now, the less likely you are to panic or make emotional decisions later. But more importantly, you can focus on the things that really move the needle. And that's what this step is about. Because, I would argue the goal here is control, and not just over your finances, but over your energy and attention. And the less clutter you carry into retirement, the more freedom you're going to have to focus on what really matters. So now that you've cleared the mental space, then it's time to start considering how best to use the funds that you have. And that moves us into strategy number 2, and that's be strategic about your debt payoffs. I think a lot of financial advice, especially more traditional ones, they would tell you to pay off everything before retirement. And I think that's well intentioned, and there's some wisdom there. But I'm going to tell you why that might be a mistake. First of all, not all debt is inherently bad. And, it might not necessarily be best to pay it all off, at least not right away, right? Now, okay, if we're talking about credit cards, a really high interest debt, yes, of course, I think that you might want to consider paying those down, because your investment returns are never going to match those of, the credit cards. And if they do, maybe you should call me. I might have a job for you. But I highly doubt that is going to be the case. Now, there are other types of debt that, could be good or bad. You might think about car payments and such. In general, I do like having people pay those off. But man, sometimes you can just get these incredibly low rates at the dealer, especially if you buy new. And if the rate is like sub 4%, even though it's a depreciating asset, how smart is it really to pay that down? I think, over time, it's hard to argue that you're not going to do better than like 4% on your investment portfolio. And you got to think that's an opportunity cost, right? And so my point about this whole section is you need to be strategic about it, but you do have to have a debt plan. If you think about a mortgage, I have several clients I can think of just off the top of my head. They have rates that are like, I've had something like 2.5%, 2.75%, 3%, even 3.5%. And you're sitting there going, man, I cannot tell these people that it's a great idea to pay their mortgage off when the rates are incredibly low. Their portfolio is almost certainly going to beat that over time. And then on top of that, that's their overall housing payment is so much cheaper than it would cost for them to rent any type of equivalent place, that I think just in general, it's better for them to keep that mortgage, even though, yes, psychologically, oh man, I still have to pay this mortgage. They've got plenty of savings to cover their payments when it comes down to it. And you have to think about the optionality that you have with the other funds, right? So you could be using those other funds to pay for taxes, to do things like Roth conversions while you're in a lower tax bracket. You could also use that to delay Social Security and lock in higher lifetime benefits because your portfolio is maybe earning more than what the interest rate is on your payments, and net, that's actually more cash flow for you. to pay yourself. It can also allow you to build up a flexible cash buffer, for unexpected expenses in retirement. If you, suddenly took $300,000 and just paid down your mortgage or whatever it is, that money is now gone, and you can't utilize it for any of the options that we just talked about, including emergencies. And look, I get it. You could always take a HELOC or something, but right now, HELOCs are really expensive, and the rate on those is a lot higher than, probably what most people are going to earn on their investment portfolios, especially in the more conservative years of their retirement. So again, my point isn't about ignoring debt or not paying off any of it, but I would simply prioritize it. Knock out the toxic stuff like personal loans or credit cards and those things, and then ask yourself the question, will paying off this other debt give me more options or fewer? Is it going to reduce risk? Is it going to reduce flexibility or not? And, the thing we always talk about around here is, assessing your trade-offs, right? And I think in this situation, you have to make sure that you're assessing them deliberately and you're not just like, okay, I have to get out of debt at all costs. So now that you understand these critical 60s optimization strategies, fill out the questionnaire in the description below, and I'll send you a personalized video analyzing your specific situation, and I'll show you exactly how to stop wasting your 60s and optimize the decade for retirement success. All right, so we move on to strategy number 3, and that's maximize savings rate acceleration. Your 60s, this is going to be the last and best chance to make big moves, and what you do now can either buy you freedom or box you into working longer than you had planned. And so the goal in your 60s isn't just, save more, but I think it's to accelerate your savings rate and make sure that those dollars are going into the right places. And I can't emphasize that enough, how big of a mistake it can be to just be like, I'm going to maximize my 401k and not think about anything else. But before we talk about that, let's talk about why accelerating your savings in 60s actually does move the needle. So yeah, look, you might only have a few working years left, but the dollars you save now are going to do more than just grow, right? They replace future income. And so an extra 10 or 15 grand saved that you maybe wouldn't have saved at age 64, that's not going to necessarily compound for decades, but it could save you from having to earn that same amount every year in retirement, or, cut it from your lifestyle. And the other thing to really think about here is that, the tools that are available to you, they're about to disappear. So in your 60s, the IRS gives you expanded contribution limit. So if you're older than 50, you can contribute an extra $7,500 to your 401k. In addition to that, for people ages 60 to 63, there's an even larger super catch up. And, you could, I think, increase your limit up to $10,000 in that little window from 60 to 63. And so look, this is a rare window, and once it closes, it's gone. So it's important to stay on top of it. And so not only do you want to save more, but then the big question becomes, where do you save that money, right? So if you think about workplace retirement plans, one great benefit nowadays is that a lot of them actually have a Roth option. So you're going to want to compare, okay, if I'm going to save my extra money in the workplace retirement plan, should I be doing a Roth or should I be doing more in pre-tax? And this is going to be very specific to your situation, and you've got to model this out to see which one is going to move the needle the most for your retirement outcomes. On top of that, and still staying within the workplace, a lot of people have health savings accounts available to them. And so if you are not in the financial position where you can necessarily, max out your retirement plan at 30 grand and max out your HSA, which, for a family, I think is about $8,500 per year right now as I'm shooting this video, you're going to have to make a choice there. And so you might be, okay, I max out my HSA and then I put a little bit less in my retirement plan, but I'm still getting as much as I can, in these retirement accounts. The other choice might be, instead of putting everything I can into the company retirement plans, even though there are extra contribution limits, I might be better off saving in outside after-tax money in a regular, after-tax brokerage account. Again, this is where you have to model these things out. I literally just finished a financial plan where that was the answer. We're going to put the bare minimum in, get the company match, and then we have to stack cash outside. And that's because of healthcare expenses and so on, because they're going to retire before Medicare, and it actually is better off for them to have more money in taxable accounts. And even they were even better off than putting it in a Roth, for example. All right, so growing your savings is one thing, but the other question to ask is, are your investments working for you the way that they should? So that brings us to strategy number 4, optimize investment allocation for your 60s goals. By the time you reach your 60s, a lot of people, you built up a pretty decent sized nest egg, but the problem often is that when I get people's portfolios, how they're invested makes absolutely no sense. What tends to happen, and this kind of goes back to our first point earlier, is that over the years, people just kind of accumulate a collection of mutual funds and old retirement accounts. And so, they kind of hop from job to job. They've got all these retirement accounts out there, and they haven't touched them sometimes for like 20 years. And so their overall investment strategy makes absolutely no sense in the broader context of things. Even worse is that a lot of them were invested in really crappy mutual funds that have really high expense ratios that are not performing. They're just eating into the overall return. So not only is their investment allocation wrong, but they just have terrible investments that are, costing them a lot of money over time in addition. So now is the time to clean all of this up. Something else to consider is that your 60s are when your investment allocation should definitely become less about growth at all costs and more about aligning, your risk with your retirement timeline. And, it's sort of that Goldilocks type scenario where often you can't be too conservative because you need your portfolio to last for maybe 30 plus years, but you also can't be too aggressive because of what's called sequence of return risk. And that's if you hit a bad string of returns while you're withdrawing, especially in the beginning of retirement, you might not ever recover from that. So there's several things you can do. There's advanced ones, and I don't want to really get way into that. But I think something that's a little bit more simple that your average person could take care of is take a U-shaped glide path to your investment allocation. And so what do I mean by this? Well, I'm going to throw the chart up on the board here. But really what it means is that, okay, as you come into your last several years before retirement, you want to reduce your stock market allocation down to lower. This is going to be different for everybody based on their needs, but it might go from something like, I was 70 or 80% invested in stocks. And every year as I'm approaching retirement, I'm taking that down a notch or two, maybe a couple percent. And then the few years around retirement, I kind of hit the bottom of that U and I kind of flatline it. Maybe you've got a 60% stock market allocation instead. Maybe it's 50%. And this is, again, going to kind of depend on your needs, your risk tolerance, and so on. But you definitely almost always want a more conservative portfolio around there. And then for the first, 3 to 5 years after retirement, if things go well, you hit good markets for that period. You probably won't have to sell stocks at the bottom or something if there's a correction or whatnot. Then you gradually increase your stock market allocation over time. So there's plenty of interesting studies that indicate this is a great strategy for allocation. So, a lot of people, they'll just get conservative at retirement and they'll keep the same allocation throughout. And I think that's a mistake because you do want your portfolio to grow. And after you're out of that critical period and your withdrawal percentage that you're taking from your portfolio, as long as it's sustainable, you can actually, increase the risk that you're taking because in all likelihood, the income that you're getting is probably going to recover it anyway, from a larger portfolio base. Something else to consider here is your account location, right? Which assets go in which accounts. This really moves the needle a lot. And that is also going to go back to, you're going to have to test what's the right withdrawal strategy for you. But on top of that, you really do want to make sure that, okay, almost always you want your Roth IRAs to be almost all in stocks, because generally that's going to be the last account that you would draw from. I'm not even joking. I've seen people come in here and it's like you've had 90% of it is in either like cash or fixed income in a Roth. And that makes no sense. And it's easy to demonstrate to them how that's going to be a huge drag on their returns over time. Same thing with your taxable account. I mean, generally, it's just more favorable to own stocks in there. And so you got to get your asset location right. And you even need to think about, should I have municipal bonds in this tax account? Do I have corporate bonds in another one? And your 60s is the perfect time to do this. And, no joke, when I run retirement plans over the course of like 30 years, asset location can literally, drop like hundreds of thousands of dollars to the bottom line, or, in extra income that you could take over your lifetime just from doing something simple like that. All right. So, now we've gotten the savings and investing out of the way. Let's move to strategy number 5, and that is eliminate lifestyle inflation. Look, let's say your kids have moved out. You're earning quite a lot of money now that you're in your 60s, probably your peak earnings. You've maybe paid off all of your debt. And a lot of people are going to treat those moments as a license to spend more. But if your goal is to retire in the next 5 to 10 years, I would say that moment should trigger a different reaction. And that reaction should be something along the lines of, here's my chance to lock in progress and not roll it back. So what I would suggest you to do instead is, number 1, redirect your freed up cash, right? A lot of times people come into this, their house is paid off. They've paid off car loans. And so you do have a lower debt service, which is fantastic. Now you want to start redirecting that into savings like we talked about. Number 2, do a lifestyle audit. What spending genuinely adds value and what has just become a habit. When I've done this, I discover here's like 5 subscription services that I never use. And it's just this thing that I'm paying for and it's a waste. And part of that goes back to, simplification. Just get rid of crap that you don't need anymore. And so this lifestyle audit can help you do that as well. And it's going to help you save money, free up more cash to accelerate that savings plan. And that kind of gets to our third point, and that might be create a glide path for spending, not just investing, right? So, that means practicing now for what you expect to live on later in retirement and make sure that it works. And look, you don't have to live like a monk, but you do have to make a choice, right? Do you want to inflate your lifestyle now or deflate it later in retirement? All right, now let's shift to strategy number 6, and that's develop your retirement identity. A big issue that I see is that very few people actually prepare well mentally for retirement. You might have a nice financial plan in place, but if you haven't focused at all on the mental side of things, I think you could be making a big mistake and you might really be setting yourself up for a harder time than it needs to be when you do finally retire. A lot of people, so much of their identity is tied up in what they do and how you contribute and, the structure that work provides. And when that disappears overnight, they become aimless and even anxious. It is very common, I've seen it over the years, for a lot of people to go back to work. And it was because they went from 100 miles an hour to 0 and they just could not handle that transition. And so, that's why your 60s are the perfect time to start building your retirement identity before you actually get there. So a few thoughts on this, right? Number 1, you can test drive your freedom. What I've seen become increasingly common for at least the clients I've been dealing with is, doing something like taking an extended break. A lot of them actually had the opportunity to work in an advisor or consultancy type capacity at their jobs, and it gave them extended time off, or even just working part-time during the year. So, that's a great option if you can do that before you retire completely. Number 2, I would say try to detach status from work. If your self-worth is anchored to your title or productivity, retirement really might feel like a loss. And so you want to start shifting that anchor now, and move that more to like values and relationships and the kind of impact that you can make, instead of just, continuing to focus on, who you are and what you do. All right. And number 3, visualize your post-work week. What I'm not talking about is like, oh, this is my dream vacation, or I'm just going to be on the golf course every day. I mean, that's just not realistic for people. So, I always encourage people to kind of visualize what an average day in retirement looks like, and then work backwards from there to kind of, work up their retirement budget and so on. But in this way, you can actually see what kind of activities am I going to be able to do to keep myself mentally active and, still maintain a sense of purpose. All right, so now we'll go to the final strategy, number 7, create a systematic 60s implementation plan. Look, guys, let's be honest. Most people aren't going to fail at retirement because they didn't know what to do. I think there's plenty of information out there on, how to be successful like that. Usually they fail because they never put a real system into place. And by the time you hit your 60s, you're no longer in that, it'll just work itself out phase anymore, right? Like you could kind of get away with that for a while. But, at this stage, you definitely need structure. You need intentionality. And you need a plan that you can actually follow, not just ideas or not just ideas. You need to build a process that, turns good intentions into recurring habits. You want to align your spending, investing, and risk with a clear timeline. You need to build decision points and have the ability for course corrections before it's too late. And you need a plan that puts structure around your freedom so retirement doesn't feel so chaotic. And that might mean using a spreadsheet. Maybe that means working with an advisor. Maybe it just means like setting up calendar reminders to review progress. But the point is, do not trust your future to autopilot. You've worked way too hard to leave the final stretch just to chance. Okay, so now that you understand the 7 specific strategies that can transform your 60s from a wasted decade into the foundation of retirement success, you can implement these approaches to ensure that you retire on your terms rather than being forced to work longer. And if you want personalized guidance on optimizing your 60s for retirement success, fill out the questionnaire in the description below, and I'll send you a customized video analyzing your specific situation and showing you exactly how to stop wasting your 60s and accelerate your path to retirement. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.